Video games and glitches. Name a more iconic duo. Nowadays, the internet has allowed for game developers to patch their games to get rid of bugs and errors, so you have to wonder, back in the Stone Ages, which ended around 2006, how did video games get fixed post-launch? In this series, I look at game updates in the old days, before the internet became commonly used to patch games via online download. You know me, I gotta fill my Sonic quota for the day or I risk going through a chili cheese flavored existential crisis. So the first game I want to talk about is the original Sonic the Hedgehog from 1991, a simple platformer where you play as a lightning fast hedgehog trying to stop an evil scientist named Dr. Eggman who's using animals to power his dangerous robots. Chances are, if you've played Sonic the Hedgehog, you haven't actually played the original version of the game. Now, I'm sure dedicated Sonic fans know all about the various re-releases of Sonic 1, from the recent Origins version, to the 2013 mobile version, to the 1997 Sonic Jam version, but there are actually multiple versions of the game originally released on the Genesis. The version of the game that you played was probably Revision 1. The original version of the game was Revision 0. Now, there weren't a ton of major changes made to Revision 1. A lot of them were minor improvements and bug fixes, but I'll talk about some of the more interesting changes. The first really noticeable change is actually in the very first level of the game, Green Hill Zone. Compare side-by-side footage of Revision 0 and Revision 1, and the difference is fairly obvious. Can't figure out what it is? In Revision 0, the clouds don't move unless Sonic is moving. However, in Revision 1, the clouds move constantly no matter what. Those of you who watched the first video in this series probably already knew that, so I hope you all feel very special. There are some other graphical changes too, like in Labyrinth Zone, Revision 1 adds this wavy effect to the water which distorts the foreground elements and even the background of the stage too. I think this is a really nice detail that gives the stage a bit more character. Another thing that was added to several of the stages is parallax scrolling to the background layers. Parallax scrolling is when you use graphical layers moving at different speeds to create an illusion of depth. This can lead to much more visually interesting imagery. Take a look at Marble Zone. In Revision 0, all of the background elements move at the same pace, so it looks like it's just one image moving around the screen as Sonic moves. However, if we take a look at Revision 1, we can see how each individual line of clouds moves at a different rate. We can see how the trees move at a different speed than the mountains. Parallax scrolling just makes the game visually so much more dynamic without really doing much more work. Now, so far I've talked about the North American release of Sonic 1, but there was also a Japanese version of the game, which actually came out after the American release. Like the American release, there is a Revision 0 and a Revision 1 version of the Japanese release. There were a few minor changes made to the Japanese releases, but the most notable one is that on the title screen, by entering the code CCCCCC up, down, left, right on Revision 0, or CCCCCC up, down, 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 left, right on Revision 1, you'll hear a ring sound effect. Then, when the Attract Mode demo starts playing, hold the down button, A, B, and C all at the same time and press start. You can also just wait for the Attract demo to end if you enjoy slowly killing your fingers, but instead of seeing the Sonic Team Presents text, you'll see this screen with a bunch of Japanese text. These are actually the credits for the game. Now, you might be wondering, wait, doesn't the game already have credits after you beat the final boss? Well, yes, but you might have noticed that the credits have a lot of weird names in them, like U2, who's credited for programming, or Big Island, who's credited as the character designer. Well, that's because back in the day, big companies didn't really like crediting the people who worked on their games. Actually, that's still going on now. But anyways, the devs ended up using pseudonyms in the credits. However, they managed to sneak in their real names in this secret screen. It's honestly a really cool Easter egg. Good to see that the devs managed to get proper credit in there, even if you do have to go through a long cheat code to get to it. Speaking of the Japanese version, there actually is a version of this game known as JP2. Remember how I said that the version of Sonic 1 that you played is probably Revision 1? Well, that is true, but there's actually an updated version of Revision 1, and this is the version of the game that's featured in the 2002 Sonic Mega Collection. So if you first played Sonic 1 via the Mega Collection, the JP2 version is the one you grew up with. The only major thing that this version changes is that it fixes the spike glitch where you could essentially be comboed to death by spikes, even though you should have invincibility frames after being hit the first time. Fun fact, in Sonic Mega Collection, you can actually play the previous two versions of the game, Revision 0 and Revision 1, via cheat codes. To access Revision 0 at the Sonic 1 info screen, press up Z, down Z, left Z, right Z, and you'll see the letters US pop up. Now you can play revision 0 of Sonic 1. If you want to play revision 1, press up, down, 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 left, right, Z, and you'll see the letters JP. If you want to go back to the Mega Collection version, press Z, 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 up, down, left, right, and you'll see JP2 on screen. While there weren't a ton of major updates in each version of the original Sonic 1, the ones we got were pretty neat. One video game that has seen numerous updates over the years is the original Resident Evil by Capcom. Resident Evil, known as Biohazard in Japan, is a 1996 third-person shooter game that also incorporates puzzles and exploration. However, when people talk about this game, they generally refer to it as a survival horror game. You play as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, two police officers, a part of a special forces team called STARS, who have been called in to find missing members of their unit. In their search for their teammates, they end up locked in a zombie-filled mansion in the forest, and now it's up to you to try to find your comrades and escape. The game was originally released in March 1996 in Japan, and then, not long afterwards, it was released in North America in April of that same year. A little while later, it got a release in Europe and other PAL regions. When Resident Evil was released in North America and Europe, there were actually some changes made to the game. Resident Evil has this cheesy live-action intro cutscene that introduces several members of the STARS team and shows how your characters got to the mansion. One really noticeable change in the international version is that a completely different song was used during this intro. This cutscene was censored when the game was localized outside of Japan too. Several scenes of gore and also a scene where Chris Redfield smokes were removed from the North American and European releases. However, the most interesting updates were actual gameplay changes made to the Western versions. The Western versions of Resident Evil were actually made more difficult than the original Japanese version. In the original Japanese version of Resident Evil, the game actually has an auto-aim feature, allowing you to instantly lock onto enemies, making it easier to shoot them. In the Western versions, you have to manually aim your gun to shoot enemies, which of course makes shooting enemies more of a hassle. Capcom also increased the difficulty by making enemies deal more damage, which of course makes it harder for you to survive. But arguably the most cruel way that they increased the difficulty was by decreasing the amount of ink ribbons that you get in the game. In Resident Evil, there are a handful of safe rooms scattered around the mansion. In those safe rooms are typewriters, and by using typewriters, you can save your game. However, in order to save your progress, you need ink ribbons. Nowadays, it's basically standard practice for games to automatically save your game frequently. However, in a lot of old games, that wasn't the case. If you died before saving, you'd lose everything. All the progress you made after your last save was gone, and that's exactly how Resident Evil works. But now that we've talked about the international releases of Resident Evil, I figure we should move on to some of the later updates to the game. Near the end of 1996 in December, Capcom released a Windows PC version of Resident Evil. This version had a full-color uncensored opening cutscene. The colors are honestly kinda bad, so I actually prefer the original black and white version. Fortunately, the game itself does look quite a bit better than the PS1 version thanks to the improved graphics. There are a handful of other differences like new unlockable weapons and outfits, being able to skip the door opening cutscenes, as well as one really big change, that being the ability to save without ink ribbons in Jill's campaign. Even in the PS1 version of the game, Jill's campaign is considered to be the easy mode of the game. While she does have less health than Chris, she has 2 more inventory slots, allowing you to carry more items, and she has a lockpick that allows you to open up some locked doors. The original Japanese PS1 release even calls Jill's campaign the easy mode on the character select screen. So it's interesting that the PC version made Jill's run even easier by allowing you to save without ink ribbons. The next year, in July 1997, Capcom released a version of Resident Evil on Sega's console, the Sega Saturn. This release is one of the most interesting updated versions, as it included a ton of brand new features, like a new challenge mode where you're put through a series of rooms filled with enemies that you're trying to beat as fast as possible, some brand new enemies like these monsters called ticks, and more gore than previous versions. Fortunately, Capcom didn't forget about all of its fans on the PS1 because in September 1997, Capcom released Resident Evil Director's Cut on the PlayStation. This version featured a new, easier difficulty, which I guess makes up for them raising the difficulty in the Western releases of the original PS1 version. Although, the most notable addition of this release is a new mode which moves the placements of items around in the mansion. Another thing this new mode adds in is some new camera angles and altered room designs as well. This game also came with a demo disc of the second game in the series, Resident Evil 2, and the Japanese version even had a demo of Megaman Legends. There was another PS1 release of the game, and it came out the following year in August 1998. This version was called Resident Evil Director's Cut DualShock version. Original 1994 PS1 controllers looked like this. Notice that they didn't have analog sticks. Later in April 1997, Sony released the dual analog controllers, which did have analog sticks. Then, later on in the year in November 1997, Sony released the DualShock controller with its iconic double vibrating motors. The DualShock version of Resident Evil Director's Cut offered support for the new DualShock controllers, as well as a brand new soundtrack that sounds really awful. The Japanese version came with a bonus disc called Biohazard Complete Disc that includes footage of Resident Evil 1.5, an early prototype of Resident Evil 2 that was scrapped by Capcom. In 2002, there was a remake of Resident Evil released on the Nintendo GameCube, but it's a remake, so not really what I'm looking to cover in this series. However, Nintendo fans would get their taste of the original Resident Evil with Resident Evil Deadly Silence, released in January 2006 on the portable Nintendo DS console. Fun fact, it's actually the first game on the DS to ever get an M rating. This is a port of the original Resident Evil 1 on the DS, with some new features and quality of life improvements, like being able to reload without going into the menu, being able to see the map on the top screen, and being able to instantly whip out your knife. The most notable new addition is a new Rebirth mode, which adds new puzzles, changes up the placements of items, and it adds these really weird first-person sections. Wow, I did not expect the Resident Evil 1 portion of this video to last so long, but then again, the game was made by Capcom, the kings of releasing updated versions of games. In 2002, Square, who are now a part of Square Enix, released their hack-and-slash RPG platformer, Kingdom Hearts, on the PlayStation 2. In this game, you control a boy named Sora who fights the forces of darkness called the Heartless with his trusty weapon, the Keyblade, as he searches for his friends, Riku and Kairi, throughout a plethora of worlds, many of which are based on classic Disney movies like Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, and Alice in Wonderland. And along the way, occasionally he'll meet various characters from the Final Fantasy series, like Tidus from Final Fantasy X, Squall from Final Fantasy VIII, and Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. The game came out in March 2002 in Japan, and 6 months later in North America, and then 2 months later in Europe and Australia. What you may not know is that the version that the West got actually got a bit of brand new content that wasn't in the original Japanese release. For example, one of the late game bosses, Chernabog from the Disney musical film Fantasia, has a new boss theme called Night on Bald Mountain, a series of classical songs originally composed by Russian musician Modest Mussorgsky in the 1800s. This was the song that actually played during Chernabog's appearance in the Fantasia film. In the original Japanese version of Kingdom Hearts, Chernabog's battle theme was one of the regular boss themes called Squirming Evil, which was used for several of the Disney boss battles throughout the game. I think giving Chernabog his own boss theme was the right move, as he is a really memorable boss, in part because you actually fly while fighting him, and because he kinda shows up out of nowhere, really adding to the surprise factor. Speaking of boss battles, the most captivating new addition to the Western version of the game were a few new in-game bosses. One of them was a boss called Kurt Zisa, who you fight in the Aladdin world of the game called Agrabah. Kurt Zisa's name actually came from a contest that Square held called Kingdom Hearts Name in Game. Basically, you could enter into the contest for the chance to have your name in the game, and apparently, a guy from New York named Kurt Zisa won. Another one of the new bosses that they added was the Ice Titan Hydros from the 1997 Disney movie Hercules. He can be fought at the Olympus Coliseum, the world based on the Hercules film. The last and probably the most iconic of the new in-game bosses is Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII, and they even brought back his theme music from the game, One Winged Angel. Like the Ice Titan, he's also fought at the Olympus Coliseum. Another major addition to the international version was difficulty options. A new expert mode was added. The expert mode makes enemies deal more damage, and it also allows you to unlock the game's secret movie by just completing the game. In the normal mode of the game, there are more requirements you have to complete to unlock the secret movie, like collecting all of the 99 Dalmatian puppies scattered throughout the game. I guess the developers figured you beat the game on the hardest difficulty, so you deserve to see the secret movie. This secret movie is called Another Side, Another Story, and it's essentially one big teaser for Kingdom Hearts 2. You see two characters wearing black coats, one of them being Riku, and another one being a hooded fellow who wields two keyblades. The movie ends with a shot of an older looking Kairi on the beach of Destiny Islands, the first major world of the game, where she, Riku, and Sora all grew up. So, as you can see, there was quite a lot of content added in the 6-month gap between the original Japanese release and the North American release. I guess the developers figured it'd be a shame not to include this new stuff in their home country, so only about 3 months after the international version was released in North America, in December 2002, Square released Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, a Japanese exclusive update of the game that included the new material found in the international version, as well as some brand new content. Just like the international version added a new difficulty mode, Final Mix also adds a new difficulty mode called Final Mix Beginner, which, as you might expect, makes the game easier by doing things like giving Sora a bunch of items at the beginning of the game to increase his stats. Let's get into some of the more interesting updates. One of the weirdest things they did was recolor most of the Heartless enemies. Their designs are mostly the same, but they use different colors. I'll be perfectly honest, I don't like the new colors. They made the color schemes of the Heartless a lot brighter, which I think makes them look a lot more garish and goofy. The most egregious example of this is easily the guard armor boss. They took this cool, menacing boss that shows up early in the game before you've really had a chance to get your bearings and turned him into an absolute joke. He now has this really bright red, blue, and yellow color scheme that looks like it came from a preschooler's coloring book. As a whole, the original Heartless colors had a fairly consistent theme that was nice to look at. A lot of purples, blues, and blacks, which made sense as the Heartless were creatures of darkness that were going around devouring worlds. Now, there's no real sense of cohesion to their colors, and a lot of them look awful to boot. Not all of them are horrible, but man, a lot of them aren't good. On a more positive note, Final Mix does have some nice new additions, like brand new attacks such as the area of effect explosion called Stun Impact, and Final Mix also gave useful new abilities for Sora to use, with arguably the best one being Leaf Bracer, which allows you to restore your health with Cure without being able to be interrupted by enemy attacks. There's also some new equipment like the new One Winged Angel and Diamond Dust Keyblades, which you get from beating Sephiroth and the Ice Titan, respectively. There are some beneficial quality of life improvements too, like being able to skip cutscenes after watching them once. A really welcome addition, since having to rewatch cutscenes after dying was really annoying in the original Kingdom Hearts. I won't go into every little update that was made. There were other changes like new Heartless, new rebalancing of items, and things like that, but I do want to mention one really big new addition, a new end-game boss. In the world Hollow Bastion, you can fight a mysterious person known as Unknown. It wouldn't be until Kingdom Hearts 2 that we found out that this man is named Xemnas, the leader of the villainous Organization 13, the main antagonist of the next 2 games in the series, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories and Kingdom Hearts 2. I always thought that it was really cool to get a sneak peek of a villain from a later game in the series, especially in the form of a boss fight. While we're talking about sneak peeks, that Another Side, Another Story secret movie actually got an expanded version in Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, called Another Side, Another Story Deep Dive. You can't unlock this in the beginner mode, only on the standard Final Mix and Final Mix Pro difficulties, which are essentially this game's equivalents of the normal and expert modes from the international KH1 release. In the deep dive version, you actually get to see the dual-wielding Keyblade user fight Neo Shadow Heartless and eventually even face off with Riku. The dual wielder is a boy named Roxas, who you get to play as in the opening segments of Kingdom Hearts 2. In Deep Dive, we even get to see Mickey rocking the black coat. Deep Dive has a bunch of text that only flashes on screen for a short time and doesn't really make any sense unless you've played the later games, but as a teaser to get you hyped for Kingdom Hearts 2, it works really well. But with Kingdom Hearts out of the way, I think that's all the game updates that I'll be talking about today. Don't worry though, if you want to hear about more game updates in the early days of gaming, I have other videos just like this one for you to check out. There should be a playlist with those videos on the screen that you can click on now. I'm gonna head out though, so thanks for watching y'all, and have a great rest of your day.